All right, so our next speaker is SSA Brian Monahan. I think that is Supervisory Special Agent. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Always have to look that up.
Uh,
He is from the FBI, the Indiana Division, and he's here to talk about their public corruption program. The only thing I'm going to say, Brian, is I know you have a video in your slides. I don't know if that will actually play.
we'll give it a shot, and if it doesn't, we'll work right through. We'll save us a
Okay.
couple of minutes.
All right.
Um,
You should be able to share anytime.
okay. All right. Ricky, are you seeing my video feed right now?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, hey, everyone, good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I will transition here shortly to some slides that I prepared. But first off, I just want to say thank you to the State Board of Accounts, the State Examiner Joyce, for giving me a little bit of time here in the middle of your conference to just talk a little bit about the FBI's public corruption program, what we're looking for, what we do, and spend a little bit of a time in those areas where your roles and my role. Your roles and my role interact. If you give me a moment here, I just want to get my slides up. Okay. If there's, I've got a share screen here and kind of a novice to WebEx. If there are issues, please let me know and we'll work through them. But I just this morning want to talk some and just kind of start with a little bit of my background. And I've been working with the FBI. I've been a special agent for 16 years. Prior to that, I was an attorney and I spent some time in the active duty military. And along the way, I've been fortunate to have a lot of enriching and diverse career experiences. And I think I spent the last 10 plus years working in the corruption program, and I'll spend a little bit of time talking to you why that's important to me, and hopefully that I can impart upon you to you why that I think that should also be important to you. Along the road with the Bureau, I've worked in a few different divisions. I've been in Indianapolis for quite some time now. I've spent some time in Philadelphia division as well as Washington, D.C. in our FBI headquarters. I've worked lots of different types of cases. Started out working gangs and drug investigations. I've worked frauds, civil rights violations, and public corruption cases. But all in all, today I really just want to talk about three big ticket issue or items. And first is the Bureau's public corruption program generally. I want to touch on a couple of cases that we've done here in Indianapolis, and many of which were worked with the State Board of Accounts, with the assistance of public servants and civil servants like yourself to help get to the bottom of these cases. And lastly, just touch some on how I think you could help us in the FBI and the public at large with our public corruption programs. So, all right, I said I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about why public corruption is important to me. And I think I found that doing these presentations, I can kind of impart and personalize a little bit of this message, hopefully to you. Unlike some of the other presentations I'm sure you've gotten over the last day and a half, mine is just feel free to put your pens down. It's not going to be very specific or technical, but I just want to help raise some understanding of what we're trying to do here in the Bureau. But I'll take you back. I'll say it was, I said I've been with the Bureau about 16 years, and I started back in 2006. I'd spent some time in the military after graduating college, and I went to law school. I practiced law for a couple of years, so I had that background, and I didn't have a law enforcement background coming in. I was working at a civil litigation department at a firm in Chicago, and 5 months later, after graduating the academy class, they dropped me into Philadelphia division and told me I was going to work street gangs and in drug cases out in North and West Philadelphia. And my experience working those cases was like an education, unlike any education I'd had in the past. It was circumstances, lifestyles, people that I had never had cross paths with. And I really got a lot from that work. I developed an understanding of what our job was, and the really and how we can impact people's and communities' lives, or impact people's lives and communities in our area. But after 5 years or so of working gang cases, I was drawn back towards the white collar program, and specifically public corruption, because what I began to feel, and what I suspected, and ultimately proved to be true, was that corruption cases are different. Corruption cases are perpetrated by men and women who look a lot like the people in the conference room and here online. And while I say that, that includes myself. The targets of corruption cases are almost always people who are educated, people who are gainfully employed, people who have career opportunities, people who, the lion's share of whom chose to work in the public sector because they had certain ideas and notions about service and sacrifice, and the importance that has to our communities. And as public servants, we've sworn or committed to protect and to help and to try and advance our communities, whether that's at a town level, a state level, federally, whether it's in our homeowners association. It's basically people who've chosen to put time and effort and labor into improving the areas where they live. These are not jobs that were chosen by people who sought this large personal enrichment in their career. So to me, this idea that our cases and our subjects are, these are people who went out and were motivated by greed and power. These cases were not cases of typically about necessity. And to me, contrasting these two primary groups of investigations that I've done over the course of my career, holding those people accountable who abuse and corrupt the ideas of service and sacrifice is motivating to me. It's kept me motivated to work corruption cases for over 10 years now. It's a way of, to me, helping our community, and also holding those accountable that had opportunities and sought to exploit them in the public arena. So within the Bureau, this is this is a very busy slide and infograph, but what I want to point out is, so within the FBI, the public corruption program is one of our top priorities. It's the highest criminal program priority, and overall across the Bureau. That means it falls in behind, protection from terrorist attacks, protection against espionage, and foreign intelligence operations from a national security perspective, as well as significant cyber-based attacks on our infrastructure. So in a way, that means that the corruption program, in terms of priorities for the FBI, stands in front of the civil rights program, gang and drug investigations, major white-collar crimes, and major violent crime issues. And I think there's lots of good reasons for that. The corruption program, as an ideal, what we try and address is, accountability of governments and civil servants, because their work goes to, directly goes to what we consider civil and cohesive societies. It's public corruption as a program looks to try and ensure that rule of law has a place in our communities and in our society. That public officials can be held accountable for their actions, because that's important from a public perception standpoint of public faith in our institutions. It impacts the quality of infrastructure and fair competition for in business and doing business with the government, and also has a significant impact on outside investment by the private sector into our public communities and public areas. So hopefully this video works. But before I try and launch it, so I've done a lot of presentations over the years, and we used to have a slide that was a tree, and we talked about the tree analogy, how public corruption is the trunk of a tree. of a tree of different types of crimes, and the branches of different types of crimes all stem from the trunk of corruption, whether it be organized crime, narcotics and gang cases, frauds in violent crime. The idea was the ability, the strength of their ability of communities to enforce their laws and to collectively govern themselves is seriously impacted, or by the corruption. So should you be able to cut down the tree, other types of crime will intent be choked off and starved. And I never really liked the slide all that much. And while I believed in the concept, I was kind of looking to replace it. And I was watching a show a few years ago on Netflix called Peaky Blinders, and some folks have seen it, but basically the Peaky Blinders are a gang or kind of a crime family set in England between World War I and World War II. And the gentleman in this clip who's about to speak is an inspector who was brought in to clean up the town. But what he's going to talk about, and do a much more eloquent fashion than I can, is how corruption impacts these other types of crime, that organized crime, terrorist organizations, and radical political movements. So let me give it a shot. Hopefully it works.
Merciless gangs blind those at sea, cut out the tongues of those who talk. You are worse than them. Those of you who have taken their bribes these years since the war, those of you who look the other way, you are worse than them. God damn you for soiling your uniforms. And then there are the IRA Fenians and the communists, blacker hearts still. They feed on the pus of all this corruption, like maggots in a corpse. Like maggots have left to swell, they will eventually swarm like flies and spread their rotten philosophy across the country and across the world. Those then are our enemies. A three-headed beast. It is my job to decapitate each one, and by God, I will do it. I don't trust any of yous.
All right, I'm back. So, again, working corruption for 11 years, that speech always gives me a little tingle down my spine. He kind of captures a lot of what I feel, and gets to the core of some of the mission that we try and do within this program here in the Bureau. But just to put a cap on it, the idea is that unchecked, corruption of public officials really, empowers criminal organizations and lets them thrive. Corruption, I talked on some, is a bit of an ideal, is an idea. It's not a tangible object. It's not a thing. It's not a kilo of fentanyl. It's not a firearm, handguns, it's not firearms in the hands of a stick-up crew robbing pharmacies. It's not, it's not a boiler room scam in a security, in a security case. The idea is something different, and it means something different to everyone. And I want to kind of start to put a finer point on it. It's because as much as we kind of touched on the bigger view, the broad view of corruption and the need of it, and rules of law and quality and accountability of public officials, at the end of the day, we got to be able to put some reality, because the reality is that I can't take a case to a prosecutor and say I want to indict the mayor of Smithtown because his actions offend my perceptions of righteousness and the rule of law. We've got to come in and work within our statutes and know what we're looking for. So as we look to define it, this is what the Bureau defines, or at least not the Bureau, but what I look at, and most other corruption supervisors and investigators look at when we're trying to decide what's a case. That it's a scheme, or we have a public official who's unlawfully using their position for personal gain. I mean, to boil it all down, we are looking for those elements. And there's different federal criminal statutes that have other elements, but these are our guideposts. A lot of times we look at it, and when we do trainings with people, we talk about it as a corruption triangle. That you have a public official, they're engaged in an official act, something associated with their office, for their personal gain, above and beyond what their ordinary salary will be. And we bring these three things together. Again, great guideposts for what we do. Great guideposts and easy takeaway for you as you go about your jobs as well, because we spend a lot of time filtering through what's bad government and what's criminal corruption. Bad government has political solutions. Bad government is sometimes just that, and I'm sure you've seen plenty of it in your time as as auditors or other position or in other positions within governmental units. We've got to find where there's criminal corruption, where a criminal prosecution is the appropriate remedy for that activity. And this is kind of our vetting process. This is our starting off point when we get a lead, when we have a tip. Do we think that these pieces are there, and warrants moving forward with an investigation to really answer those questions and get to the bottom of what happened or what might still be going on. And naturally, the counterpoint to the triangles, the other side of it, is those individuals who seek to corrupt those in office. It's the two to tango. Those folks that are involved on the private side in these schemes are no less culpable than the ones on the inside working from within the government. So, public officials, listen, there are millions of potential targets out there. And I just throw this slide up to say, this is everyone. We're just not focused on the elected officials. We're just not focused on those folks that may or may not be in the news. We work cases at all levels because the impact can be felt in communities. And we'll talk in a little bit about how some of these cases at a very local level, while the dollar amounts may not be big, the impact to the communities are substantial. Official acts, again, these are things tying in what the public official has authority to do or is trying to influence other public officials to do. Again, it's matters within the scope of their authority, whether it's voting on signing legislation or signing legislation, approving spending, awarding contracts, judges dismissing or prosecutors dismissing cases and charges, law enforcement officers assisting criminal organizations with their goals. I point out that official acts are not providing access. Basically, according to some recent Supreme Court decisions, public officials are more than, it is lawful for them to sell access to them and their time. Most don't do so overtly, but nonetheless, that was determined to be a First Amendment right by the court. So simply providing access and availability to a public official is not considered corruption, nor is legal conduct, which doesn't involve the political office. So for those of you who want to go back a ways to the 80s, that is a photo of a former Washington, D.C. Mayor, Marion Barry, smoking crack in his hotel room. Actually, it ended up being an FBI case, but in turn changed some of our approach to corruption a long time ago to say this. Listen, that is not a corrupt act. It is unlawful and illegal, but and potentially chargeable, just not outside not within the parameters of an FBI public corruption case. Lastly, the things of value, again, very broad, can be anything. It's not just simply cash and unmarked envelopes being passed across a desk. Anything that can be monetized. This slide, I talked some before about the tree slide with the public, the criminal tree and public corruption being the trunk of it, and never really liking it, and finally getting the inspiration to replace it with something different. I've been trying to replace the term "things of value" for years, and I can't come up with something because we go, in our discussions, we talk about quid pro quos and this for that and mens rea, and these shroud these ideas in Latin, archaic Latin terms, and we then turn around and throw in a thing of value, but it makes a point. Again, we try and bring the official act, the thing of value, and the public official all in under an umbrella. Our typical schemes, again, these are bribery, extortion, kickbacks, and embezzlements. Bribery is usually what we see where a public official or someone on the government side, requires some payment up front for them to take a particular act. Extortion is kind of a similar, related concept, but more along the lines where a public official refuses to take an action unless they're paid. Think about like a home inspector who's issuing certificates of occupancy and shaking down a tenant or a prospective buyer to pay him a little extra on the side before he'll move the paper along. Kickbacks and embezzlements, frankly, that's a lot of what I think in a local government and contract and procurement standpoint, we see a lot of this, and I think this is probably most of what you may have a window to in your duties as auditors. Kickbacks are a chunk of a government contract or payment out to a private individual, which has been designated to flow back to the person approving the project or approving the spending. Embezzlements are just straight up theft from the cookie jar, just stealing money out of accounts, sometimes just very overtly, other times through manipulation of false, fake invoices and inflated costs that are siphoned off. So also within other corruption matters are election crimes, frauds against the government, which is slightly different than corruption, at least as we look at fraud against the government. There's no culpable government actor involved in fraud against the government. It's third parties taking advantage of and exploiting government programs. We also deal with obstruction, false statements, and perjury, as well as at times pick up a case involving a public official involved in not in corrupt actions, but just some other related criminal conduct that is appropriately lands to us because we're accustomed to dealing with these sensitive matters and doing so in a way that's effective and quiet when we need to be. Investigative techniques. We arrive through our cases. We use a full gamut of them. Everything from just overt sit-down interviews, surveillance, all the things you would expect that we would do on a pretty routine basis. And as you get down to the bottom of the list, undercover operations and wiretaps, those are not as commonplace as some of the things we do. Those are invasive techniques, and we've got to have a lot of justification for doing those. And they often don't, cases never start, at that point. But as we talked some about the corruption being kind of conceptual, proving up a corruption case is a lot about proving states of mind and intent. A lot of the individual acts in a corruption case by themselves seem legitimate. There's nothing illegal about a company making campaign donations to a public official with the hope that that down the line that they would receive a government contract. That is politics. That's how it works. What we need to prove, and the difference between politics and a corruption case, is that there is a existing agreement and understanding at the time that those donations were made that they would in fact receive a certain contract. And we got to prove that. And so oftentimes the way that we have to prove that is through things like wiretaps or just operating sources and doing undercover operations to get the terms or to collect that evidence of that backroom deal. And it's challenging, and it's difficult, but again, we are up for the task, and those people who devote themselves to investigating corruption cases know what comes with the territory. But along those lines of doing wiretaps and the importance of getting that type of information, I think we all remember the former Illinois Governor Rod Blagojevich. In his case, that was well litigated and ultimately has had sentence commuted, but they were up on his phone and they captured statements like this that are very helpful to illuminating what a particular public official's intent is.
I mean, I've got this thing, and it's fucking golden, and I'm just not giving it up for fucking nothing.
All right. So again, it's just a clip, but it lends that context. It kind of puts a little sizzle on the steak as to, hey, what was going on at the time? What was he understanding? What was his state of mind when he was trying to bargain his way out or leverage that open Senate seat for his own personal gain? So consequences of corruption. Corruption, again, we talked about it, or we talked about it being a concept that means lots of different things to lots of different people, and I've tried to define what it means to the FBI. And while that's a concept, the impacts of corruption are very tangible. I've had the opportunity to do corruption trainings and talks in cases, particularly while I was in Washington, D.C. and in headquarters across the globe in different countries. And I think where corruption was very endemic and, really holding countries and entire nations back from being able to advance, and then turn around and see it coming back to Indiana and seeing similar impact on more at a local scale, and seeing these consequences that really run the gamut. And we see that the cost of services and materials to the government are raised because those costs of corruption, those costs of the bribes, those costs of the kickbacks get cooked into that cost, and that's a cost borne by the honest citizens and businesses in those communities. You end up having quality of infrastructure and services are diminished because the process has been corrupted, that the right work isn't going to the right people at the right cost, and that maybe an inferior product or person gets or company gets the bid, and you end up having poor infrastructure and poor quality of work. Seeing that small corruption leads to larger and systemic corruption. Seen this in a lot of communities. I'm sure you've seen it, either within your own county or townships within your county or towns within your county or in other counties or states where it just gets a hold and everyone knows that to do business in a particular area or community, it requires something extra, that it's not above board and it's not on the up and up. And the communities eventually grow to tolerate and accept that corruption to the detriment, to everyone's detriment. And ultimately, it also can suppress outside investment. If a community is known not to be receptive or has a culture where the public officials routinely shake other people down and require extra payments and kickbacks and perks on the side, I think most companies and most private entities will take a pass and take their business elsewhere. So, a couple of cases. So we've discussed why corruption is important. We've discussed what the Bureau tries to do with it. And I just want to run through and talk about a couple of cases and touch on a few. I also think it's a good point just for me to recognize that we do have a great working relationship with the State Board of Accounts. They've been a very good partner and helping us sort through some of those ideas of, rooting out, discerning criminal corruption versus some bad government, some bad practices. And they've had like I said, they've been a great partner and a huge assist over the years. Couple recent cases. So John Bunchich, the former Lake County Sheriff, was convicted a few years ago for soliciting and receiving $35,000 in bribes, and this was just from an FBI informant about staying on the designated, the authorized tow truck lists up in Lake County. He was ultimately sentenced to 151 months of confinement. This case wasn't just John Bunchich. There were 4 other Lake County officials were convicted, several of which were higher ups in the Lake County Sheriff's Department, as well as a couple of town council people in the Lake County area. Greg Nichols out in Delaware County in Muncie, the former Muncie building commissioner, convicted of defrauding the city of Muncie of $200,000 in falsified for demolitions of non-existent houses and falsification of invoices, vendor invoices for work that never happened. He got a couple of years prison. Monique Boiling Boyd, Gary IT department, misappropriated about about $1 million worth of Apple products and attempted to resell them on the side for her own benefit. She received 63 months. Frank Furnell, on the west side of the state, out in Vigo County, a jury conviction or kickback scheme, which deprived the Vigo County School Corp of $100,000. He received 24 months in prison. But what I want to point out here is this: back and forth. This is why these cases. This is why these cases are important. Going all the way back to the beginning, when I talked about these are about greed. This is about opportunity. These are about protecting the viability of our government units and of our civil servants. These cases were about public safety, housing, infrastructure, or technology infrastructure, and education. These are the core elements of what any government is doing. And these four, amongst many others, decided they were going to take their access, flout their commitment to helping and serving the public and enriching themselves at the expense of these basic community services, these basic government services that everyone expects they do. These basic services that people pay taxes for and expect to receive benefit from. These are the people that motivate me every day to go to work, because they're not the only ones. And there's other people out there, and they were tempted and they went down their own respective paths for their own respective reasons, but none of those reasons are a justification for ultimately doing what they did. So I know I've talked a lot, and I do miss being in front of groups to get a little more personal interaction, but I do want to show you what corruption looks like. It's this. So the photo on the right, that is John Bunchage taking a $3,500 cash bribe and shoving it into his back pocket in some nondescript parking lot in Lake County, Indiana. That is it. That is a elected public official literally lining his pockets with cash, with a cash bribe. And I know that's, sometimes you see TV and movies and there are these very, momentous things. Just quiet, nondescript corruption happening right up in broad daylight, in public, under everyone's nose. That's what it looks like. So one last touch, I want to touch on a couple other cases here. A couple years ago, we did something. We teamed up with State Board of Accounts. They brought the idea to us of trying to bring in several cases that they came across throughout the state, and bring in federal prosecutors and state prosecutors, the FBI and state police and investigators, across the state, and identify, kind of shed some light on the pervasiveness of corruption cases across the state. Ultimately, we brought 15 public employees were charged in separate cases in both federal and state courts. The collective loss was over $1 million to the taxpayers. And the state board also pursued its civil charges to try and claw back some of those funds. I know this is dense text here, but 5 cases went federal, and I think it's just worth pointing out some of the numbers here. Is fire department treasurer embezzled $140,000. Township trustee, another fire department treasurer, another $150,000. Matthew Mathis, $43,000 from his fire department. Clerk treasurer embezzled $52,000 from a town utility fund. Kelly Klein, Greenwood Middle School extracurricular account activities treasurer, embezzled $58,000. Now these were all federal cases that were investigated and prosecuted federally, as well as 10 prosecutions, ultimately resulting in 9 convictions. But again, I just ask you to look at the titles of these folks. Extracurricular activity treasurer, $10,000. Jail matron, $9,000. Clerk treasurer, It's $7,600 from the utility funds. Trustee overpaying himself and his spouse, $20,000. A bond bank case, which was a big ticket item, $400,000. Clerk treasurer from a school corp, $13,000. EMS director, $12,000 in training. A county commissioner selling county vehicles, or selling a county vehicle for a loss of $7,500. Listen, these are utility funds, extracurricular accounts, utility funds, volunteer fire departments. These are not entities, as you know, these are not entities with giant budgets. So while we talk about, I think or the figures here aren't astronomical in and of themselves, but the impact is. I don't think the Cayuga Utility Fund had $60,000 spare money laying around. I'm fairly certain that the Greenville Middle School extracurricular account didn't have $40,000 burning a hole in its pocket. This was money and funds that needed to go to people who needed the services. And these are the folks that jumped in and decided to enrich themselves instead of doing their job and staying committed to a public cause and public mission. Which is why, while these cases are unfortunate, they're not rare. I'm sure there are many of them that are still going on today, which brings me to why I'm here and why the FBI needs your help. So nationally, they've launched a couple. We have an active public contract corruption initiative, and it's basically a lot of it. There's some slides and some stats in here that I can touch on, but it's basically a lot of what I've already been talking about. It's just zeroing in even further on, taking a look at the contracting and procurement process. This basically it's a follow the money type of initiative and approach. And there's some stats here about. These are not FBI stats or gleaned from other sources, but globally, $6.3 billion in loss, 11 million contracts that go through the U.S. government a year, $1 billion in spending between government and private businesses every day. Estimation that a U.S. government agency can lose 5% of its budget to contract corruption through misappropriation or financial statement fraud or corruption. So again, these are the big numbers, but I think it's the smaller numbers I was talking about that actually have, even just as much, if not more, impact. So the goal is to try and mitigate these schemes in the contract and the typical corruption schemes through the contracting process. We talked some about kickbacks, bribes, gratuity, embezzlements, and thefts is what we're looking for. A strategy here is to identify red flags in the contracting process and conduct proactive investigations. Proactive investigations being important. We kind of talked about the different techniques and the Blagojevich clip and soundbite on how it requires oftentimes requires that level of integration to real time to develop and to understand what's going on and get the evidence we need to bring a corruption prosecution. The approach is basically today, you amongst this group, and I do thank you for your time, amongst many others, that we reach out to our local MVPs, right, to identify red flags as indicators of corruption. And I'll talk about the red flags here in a minute. I think Ricky is going to include those in some of your materials, and it's just a flyer. Please, when you have a minute, take a look, and you'll go through, and it's these aren't smoking gun type of issues, but just things to keep in mind, because you folks, particularly auditors, you're the chief financial officers of the county. You see what's going on. You have insight. You're the gatekeepers for releasing for the releasing of spending of government money. You have insight and understanding that we don't have, and we can't see until we launch into an investigation. And even then, it's up to us. We need to learn the process and then figure out what's going on and follow the money and use those tools that are available to us to get to the bottom of it. But the MVPs, the auditors. You know what the projects are and the purchases that are going out. You know which public officials are backing the spending. You know the vendors who are receiving the contracts. More than anything else, you know what's going on. You have the finger on the pulse, and you have a gut feeling as to what's right, what's business as usual, and what seems out of the ordinary, and potentially corrupt activity. I'm going to jump through this, and we're a few minutes behind. These are just a couple of the red flags in that flyer, and there's nothing here that is per se corruption, but it's just suspiciousness in a bidding process, or how contracts are being awarded, or changes in behavior by particular vendors, which indicate a loosening of oversight. And if you couple enough of these together, a little bit of enough of that smoke can kind of look much more like a bonfire, where the Bureau could get involved in taking a look and opening a case and doing an investigation. So our takeaways here is, the Bureau, we're committed to fighting corruption. We need your help. In 40 minutes, I don't expect to make you all experts in conducting corruption investigations, but really a plea or an appeal to you to keep an eye out for these things, and know, based on your experience, what you see in your gut, to do the right thing, and to reach out and let us know, and help. And I want to take some time early in the presentation to kind of discuss, hey, what we're looking for, on a corruption case, to help you better understand that. So that's the end of my presentation. Again, there's my contact information. That's my direct line. Please feel free to reach out. We'll, if you have a concern, or question, we'll talk through it and walk through it. But the first step is, just knowing that we're here, we're here, and we're interested, and we need your help. So let me see if I can get back to the video feed. Is my video feed back on?
Yep.
All right. Hey, again, thanks to State Board for giving me a little bit of time. I hope I didn't go over too much. Again, I wish I could be there in the room with you. I think it makes a big difference. But our policies now over DOJ kind of limit our ability to show up in groups bigger than 50. So hope you enjoy the rest of your presentation, or rest of your conference. And thank you for the time. I'm happy. If there are questions, I'm happy to grab one and listen. If not, I know I'm sitting between you.
So
I know. All right, everyone. Hey, thank you. Appreciate the time. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
thank you, Brian. Thank you.